Yes, please.
Please, because that's going to make. And as a matter of fact.
Hello, everyone. This is the Fifth Epochal Revelation Fellowship. I'm Reverend Dr. Roger Paul, and I'm here with my wife, Diane Paul, Reverend Diane Paul, Millie and Stephen, and Jill. And today we're going to study paper 147, the Interlude Visit to Jerusalem. Jerusalem. I said Jerusalem so often. I was messed up here. And that starts on page 1647.1 or paper 147.01. I'm just going to say a little prayer and we'll get started. Father, thank you for bringing us together today. Thank you for the opportunity to study this wonderful revelation. Pray that you open our hearts and minds today that we might learn something and share it with others. And we pray that you'll watch over us this holiday season and bless this group that we might help share your word. We say this in the name of your Son, Jesus of Nazareth, Michael and Amen. Amen. And I think I'll start reading today for a change. Paper 147, the Interlude Visit to Jerusalem. Jesus and the apostles arrived in Capernaum on Wednesday, March 17th, and spent 2 weeks at the Bethesda headquarters before they departed for Jerusalem. These 2 weeks, the apostles taught the people by the seaside, while Jesus spent much time alone in the hills about his Father's business. During this period, Jesus, accompanied by James and John Zebedee, made 2 secret trips to Tiberias, where they met with the believers and instructed them in the gospel of the kingdom. I wanted to bring something up here on this first paragraph. First of all, you notice it says Jesus spent some time in the hillside being about his Father's business. Jesus was still running much of the local universe of Nebadon from earth because he had finished his bestowal, right? And even though Emmanuel was overseeing everything, he was still responsible as the sovereign of the universe. So when he went up in the hills, he not only talked to God, he probably talked to Gabriel and Emmanuel both about what was going on with the Lucifer rebellion, what was going on in his universe, right? So that's what they're talking about there. It was about his Father's business.
I have a question. It talks about dates. It has a lot of dates here.
Yeah.
I'm sure somewhere on one of the sites they have actually done the chronology of where he was at what time.
Yes, it's on our website.
That's on our website.
Yeah, under the link that says maps, it breaks down exactly this. Where he was and when. Okay? The same sort of thing is done just in a website on both, I think the foundation and the fellowship both has a breakdown like this on their website too. So all I did on these slides is added the dates and a map of where those actually are on this site. But these are under on our website, AtlantaUrantiaStudyGroup.org and Fifth Epochal Revelation StudyGroup.com. At the top of the page, there's a little link that says maps, and all of these are on. Okay. And here's another map of the same thing. Breaks it down. This is hard to see this small. You can enlarge it though when you look at it at home. Jill, would you like to take the next one? And welcome.
Many of the household of Herod believed in Jesus and attended these meetings. It was the influence of these believers among Herod's official family that had helped to lessen that ruler's enmity towards Jesus. These believers at Tiberias had fully explained to Herod that the kingdom which Jesus proclaimed was spiritual in nature and not a political venture. Herod rather believed these members of his own household and therefore did not permit himself to become unduly alarmed by the spreading abroad of the reports concerning Jesus' teaching and healing. He had no objections to Jesus' work as a healer or religious teacher. Notwithstanding the favorable attitude of many of Herod's advisors, and even of Herod himself, there existed a group of his subordinates who were so influenced by the religious leaders at Jerusalem that they remained bitter and threatening enemies of Jesus and the apostle, and later on did much to hamper their public activities. The greatest danger to Jesus lay in the Jerusalem religious leaders and not in Herod. And it was for this very reason that Jesus and the apostles spent so much time and did most of their public preaching in Galilee rather than at Jerusalem and Judea.
Okay, remember Herod was the one that Jesus had to go before to try to get his father's money that was coming to him when the wall fell on him doing construction. And of course he was not successful in getting that. And that's why Jesus called Herod that wily fox at one time, for cheating his family, out of the money that his father had earned. So he had met Herod before. He'd been before Herod before. Of course, Herod had no idea that this same Jesus, that all his help, all the people that were servants at his castle were. He had no idea that this was the same Jesus that he had talked to before. They were talking about it. So he had a relationship with Herod, and he knew what kind of man Herod was. Right?
A centurion's servant. On the day before they made ready to go to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover, Mangus, a centurion or captain of the Roman guard stationed at Capernaum, came to the rulers of the synagogue, saying, "My faithful orderly is sick and at the point of death. Would you therefore go to Jesus in my behalf and beseech him to heal my servant?" The Roman captain did this because he thought the Jewish leaders would have more influence with Jesus. So the elders went to see Jesus, and their spokesman said, "Teacher, we earnestly request you to go over to Capernaum and save the favorite servant of the Roman Centurion, who is worthy of your notice, because he loves our nation, and even built us the very synagogue wherein we have so many times spoken."
So they wanted the centurion's servant to be healed, didn't they? Because it was benefit to them and the centurion. Now, do y'all know what a centurion is? A centurion's in charge of many men. Like a whole company of men. So he's a pretty influential person, right?
And when Jesus had heard them, he said, "I will go with you." And as he went with them over to the centurion's house, and before they had entered his yard, the Roman soldier sent his friends out to greet Jesus, instructing them to say, "Lord, trouble not yourself to enter my house, for I am not worthy that you should come under my roof. Neither did I think myself worthy to come to you. Wherefore I sent the elders of your own people. But I know that you can speak the word where you stand, and my servant will be healed. For I am myself under the orders of others, and I have soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes. To another, come, and he comes. And to my servants do this, and to my servants do this or do that, and they do it."
Okay, now keep in mind here that the centurion has still not met Jesus, has he? He sent his friends and servants out to talk to him, because he felt like he wasn't worthy to talk to him. So, which is kind of interesting, because here it shows a picture of the centurion himself talking to Jesus, but that's not really what happened. Okay? All right.
But he believed. He said, "I know."
But he believed.
And my
That's right.
servant will do it.
That's right.
Okay. Which means that they had some kind of the concept, or they projected the concept in the healing, that Jesus was not doing himself the healing, but he was ordering some
Others
form of others. So I'm not sure why they believe that, or it's just coincidence, or it's because Jesus had said so at some point.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's probably that Jesus had intimated something like that at some point. That he had many beings under him that can take care of multiple things. But the general population wouldn't have believed that, right? They think he's a healer. You know, he's a miracle worker. They think it's Jesus himself. You know.
That's not cheesecake.
And when Jesus heard these words, he turned and said to his apostle and those who were with them, I marvel at the belief of the Gentiles. Verily, verily, I say to you, I have not found so great faith. No, not in Israel. Jesus, turning from the house, said, Let us go hence. And the friends of the centurion went into the house and told Mangus what Jesus had said. And from that hour the servant began to mend and was eventually restored to his normal health and usefulness.
Okay, so Jesus is still not seeing the centurion, has he?
No.
Okay. So
He still hasn't
when
seen
he
it.
still hadn't seen him, right? But this is a painting of that incident. And you see the centurion down here kneeling at Jesus. But we know this didn't really happen because, why? Because
Jesus did not go into the house.
That's right. Did not go into the house. Did not actually meet the centurion. He did the healing from afar, right?
When Jesus said, let us go hence, does it mean let's just leave as you requested, I'm not going to enter the house, or let's go into the house?
No, he meant let's go on with our business and keep doing what we're doing. In other words, he had, because the man had such faith, he automatically took care of the sick person, right? And he didn't need to go in the house to do that, right?
He didn't need to bad because he had so much faith.
Yeah.
He'd have gone to say, hey, greetings to you and faith or something like that. But I guess he didn't. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, this is what makes it interesting here. But we never knew just what happened on this occasion. This is simply the record, and as whether or not, here it is, invisible beings ministering healing to the centurion servant was not revealed to those who accompanied Jesus. We only know of the fact that the servant's complete recovery. So they don't tell us whether he actually sent another being to
Well,
fix it.
the reporter here is saying this is the record.
This is the record.
That's all that was recorded.
That's right. That's right. All right.
Which means such a healing could be either way.
Yeah, it could be.
Does it imply that faith alone can heal?
Yes. Yeah. And Jesus says that in several other occasions in the book. That it's your faith that has healed you. Your faith has made you well, right? That's what healing's all about, right? Even though it's faith that starts out the process, and of course Jesus being the creator of the local universe, wherever he wills is, so he's got a whole host of beings that can make this happen physically, master physical controllers, the whole 9 yards. So the actual healing may have been done by other entities, but it was because of the will of Jesus that it happened. And he said, and he teaches us it's the faith that makes us well. Right?
So does it mean that when Jesus is not around, when someone has faith but is sick and desires illness, some other master physical control and whatever, so angels can
Heal them.
Can work on helping healing the physical illness, intervene in healing.
Yeah, as long as it's the Father's will. That's the kicker there. It must be the Father's will that this happens. So,
But it would be the
because you'll
Father-
notice every time Jesus healed, he says, Father, if it be your will. Right? Every time.
Okay, so then that brings the other question, if I don't want to spend too much time though, but so if you have several people who have faith and are sick, why would the Father's will be, okay, I'm going to be okay with you healing, and you know what, that's my will that you are not healed.
Yeah, that does sound.
Because, all right, think about this. We're all on different pathways of spirituality, right? And one person that needs healing is different, totally different from another person that needs healing. So the Father may decide this person is spiritually going to benefit others, it is on the pathway to me, etc., etc. And someone else may be totally ignoring the Father and all other things. And that would be a selfish reason to ask for healing, wouldn't it?
Now I'm talking about faith.
Yeah.
So
but-
all of them have faith.
Yeah, well, with all of them have faith, according to what Jesus has said, they'll all be healed. Now, remember, when Jesus healed the thousands out in front of the house, we studied not long ago, right? All he said was, Father, if it be your will, make my children well, right? And everyone that was afflicted was healed. Even the ones that didn't deserve it, right? Everyone was. So I guess it's a case by case and an individual by individual thing. Who's to say? Okay, you want to take the next one?
To the journey to Jerusalem. Early on the morning of Tuesday, March 30th, Jesus and the apostolic party started on their journey to Jerusalem for the Passover, going by the route of the Jordan Valley. They arrived on the afternoon of Friday, April 2nd, and established their headquarters, as usual, at Bethany. Passing through Jericho, they paused to rest while Judas made a deposit of some of their common funds in the bank of a friend of his family. This was the first time Judas had carried a surplus of money, and this deposit was left undisturbed until they passed through Jericho again, when on the last and eventful journey to Jerusalem, just before the trial and death of Jesus.
Okay, so Judas was doing his job as a treasurer, right, during this period of time. And this is right before the Passover.
The party had an uneventful trip to Jerusalem, but they had hardly got themselves settled in Bethany when from near and far, those seeking healing for their bodies, comfort for their troubled minds, and salvation for their souls, began to congregate, so much so that Jesus had little time for rest. Therefore they pitched tents at Gethsemane, and the Master would go back and forth from Bethany to Gethsemane to avoid the crowds which so constantly thronged him. The apostolic party spent almost 3 weeks at Jerusalem, but Jesus enjoined them to do no public preaching, only private teaching and personal work.
Why would that be?
So as not to draw attention.
So it's not to draw attention of the Sanhedrin, right? That's exactly right. And Jesus was like a rock star. He had people following him around all the time.
For different reasons.
Yeah.
At Bethany, they quietly celebrated the Passover, and this was the first time that Jesus and all of the 12 partook of the bloodless Passover feast.
Wait a minute. I skipped in there.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
We just read that.
Oh, okay. I didn't skip it. Okay. All right.
The apostles of John did not eat the Passover with Jesus and his apostles. They celebrated the feast with Abner and many of the early believers in John's preaching. This was the second Passover Jesus had observed with his apostles in Jerusalem.
Okay, remember Abner was the head of John's, the Baptist apostle, right? Who was Abner also? He was the head of the Church of Philadelphia, right? The church that actually stayed closer to the teachings of Jesus after his death. Okay.
He was the leader of John the Baptist's group after John left.
That's right.
All right. When Jesus and the 12 departed for Capernaum, the apostle of John did not return with them. Under the direction of Abner, they remained in Jerusalem and the surrounding country, quietly laboring for the extension of the kingdom, while Jesus and the 12 returned to the work in Galilee. Never again were the 24 all together until a short time before the commissioning and sending forth of the 70 evangelists. But the two groups were cooperative, and notwithstanding their differences of opinion, the best of feelings prevailed.
Okay. So they had a different concept of what was going on than Jesus' 12 apostles, right? At the Pool of Bethesda, the afternoon of the second Sabbath in Jerusalem, as the Master and the apostles were about to participate in the temple services, John said to Jesus, "Come with me, I would show you something." John conducted Jesus out through one of the Jerusalem gates to a pool of water called Bethesda, which means pool of water. Okay. Surrounding this pool was a structure of 5 porches, under which a large group of sufferers lingered in quest of healing. This was a hot spring. Those reddish tingling waters would bubble up at irregular intervals because of gas accumulations in the rock caverns underneath the pool. This periodic disturbance of the warm waters was believed by many to be due to supernatural influences, and it was a popular belief that the first person who entered the water after such a disturbance would be healed of whatever infirmity he had. Superstition, right? Alright. And this is a picture of the actual location in Jerusalem of this pool.
The apostles were somewhat restless under the restrictions imposed by Jesus, and John, the youngest of the 12, was especially restive under his restraint. He had brought Jesus to the pool thinking that the sight of the assembled sufferers would make such an appeal to the Master's compassion that he would be moved to perform a miracle of healing, and then all Jerusalem would be astounded and presently want to believe in the gospel of the kingdom. Said John to Jesus, "Master, see all of these suffering ones. Is there nothing we can do for them?" And Jesus replied, John, why would you tempt me to turn aside from the way I have chosen? Why do you go on desiring to substitute the working of wonders and the healing of the sick for the proclamation of the gospel of eternal truth? My son, I may not do that which you desire, but gather together these sick and afflicted, that I may speak words of good cheer and return comfort to them.
Notice Jesus keeps stressing the importance of the spiritual message, not the healing. Right.
Not much has changed.
Not much has changed.
Today the church teaches all of his miracles.
That's right.
Now, the same, they just totally missed the whole point, is what it boils down to.
This is here. This is a picture of this pool they're talking about. People gathered around it, waiting for the waters to bubble up. This is an artist's impression of it again, right? And you can read this on your own. This is the Pool of Bethesda, oil and copper. This picture illustrates the passage in the Gospel of John 5:2-9 that described how Christ healed an infirm that would not bathe himself in Bethesda pool near Jerusalem. Hebrews thought that it had miraculous virtues, and presence of the portico is mentioned in the Gospel, attributed to Messeri, who was working this influence of Milanese classicism. See, I should have let Jill read the French.
That's French. It's Italian.
Huh?
I don't think that was French. It was Italian.
Was it? So you know how much I know about other languages. Okay, who's up? Huh?
In speaking to those assembled, Jesus said, Many of you are here sick and afflicted because of your many years of wrongdoing. Some suffer from the accidents of time, and the next one gets me. Others as a result of the mistakes of their forebears. We need to discuss that.
Okay.
While some of you struggle with the handicaps of the imperfect conditions of your temporal existence. But my Father works, and I would work, to improve your earthly state, but more especially to ensure your eternal estate. None of us can do much to change the different difficulties of life unless we discover the Father in heaven so wills. After all, we are all beholden to do the will of the eternal. If you could all be healed of your physical afflictions, you would indeed marvel, but it is even greater that you should be cleansed of all spiritual disease and find yourselves healed of all moral infirmities. You are all God's children. You are the sons of the Heavenly Father. The bonds of time may seem to afflict you, but the God of eternity loves you. And when the time of judgment shall come, fear not. You shall all find not only justice, but an abundance of mercy. Verily, verily, I say to you, he who hears the gospel of the kingdom and believes in this teaching of sonship with God has eternal life. Already are such believers passing from judgment and death to light and life. And the hour is coming when even those who are in the tombs shall hear the voice of the resurrection.
A lot of wisdom in that one paragraph.
Yeah, I know. The only thing that I highlighted when I was reading it was the results of the mistakes of the forebears.
Okay, let's talk about that. Let's just go through all of them here real
Yeah,
quick.
there's a lot there.
Yeah. You're sick of because of the many years of wrong living. How can that be? If you abuse your body, you drink too much, smoke too much, all these things that affect your body. It affects
Today they take drugs too.
take drugs, it affects your body, right? Or you overwork, you don't rest properly. You know, that's why the Sabbath was set up so that men would rest. You know, you work 7-8 days a week, you're going to get sick sooner or later. And the others from accidents of time. Accidents happen to everyone, you know. Last week when I was working in the thing out here, I fell out of the shed. You know, I was done for the day, walked out, took a step down on a step, and it just went out from under me, you know. It's accidents of time, right? Accidents happen to everybody, right? And others as a result of the mistakes of their forebears, okay? Now, what are they talking about here? We're talking about inheriting DNA, right, from your parents. And your parents, the way they, basically when you were in the womb, if your mother smokes and drinks and doesn't take care of you during those period of time, you're going to have a result of that in you growing up, right? That affects the children as they grow up. So that's
I see mistakes of your forebears also is selecting the wrong partner.
selecting the wrong partner, not having
Not moving up, but
Yeah.
staying or moving down.
laterally or down, either one, you know. I mean, we know that we're going to study here shortly about how the early tribes went back and mixed again with the lower forms of animals. Yeah. So, you know, all of those things affect what? The children to come. Right? So, you want great children, pick great mates, right? And then you'll have great DNA. Okay. But, and then he goes on to say that, you know, he understands all these things, but really he wants to improve their spiritual sickness, right? Their spiritual disease, and being healed of their moral infirmities. In other words, help them along spiritually, so that as sons of God, as long as they accept themselves as sons of God, they already have eternal life. But what he wants to do is help push them along to the period of what? Light and life. Now, do they have to wait to the period of light and life? No. You can live the period of light and life in your daily habits today. You know, it's really up to you. And that's what he's talking about here. So, interesting. All right, here.
And many of those who heard believed the gospel of the kingdom. Some of the afflicted were so inspired and spiritually revivified that they went about proclaiming that they had also been cured of their physical ailments.
I love that.
That's nice. That's
Yeah.
nice.
And that happened quite often to Jesus, didn't it? People would have spiritual infirmities or depression, things like that, and they would go on saying that they've been healed.
His words actually lifted your consciousness into a higher level.
Right?
This one is good. This is
One man who had been many years downcast and grievously afflicted by the infirmities of his troubled mind, rejoiced at Jesus' word, and, picking up his bed, went forth to his home, even though it was the Sabbath day. This afflicted man had waited all these years for somebody to help him. He was such a victim of the feeling of his own helplessness that he had never once entertained the idea of helping himself, which proved to be the one thing he had to do in order to effect recovery: take up his bed and walk.
Pretty amazing.
That's really a lot of the problems that you're seeing, as we're so involved with our helplessness that we don't even realize how much we could help ourselves.
Yeah, we have the cure.
Yeah.
All we have to do is reach out for it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's we got to seek Him first, not what He can do.
That's right. That's right. Then said Jesus to John, "Let us depart ere the chief priest and the scribe come upon us and take offense that we spoke words of life to these afflicted ones." It was the Sabbath, that's what he's talking about, right? And they returned to the temple to join their companions, and presently all of them departed to spend the night at Bethany. But John never told the other apostles of this visit of himself and Jesus to the Pool of Bethesda on the Sabbath afternoon. You see why he said we need to leave? Because if the priests found out that he had healed somebody on the Sabbath, then that would be a big deal, right? And he didn't want to upset everyone. Okay. Wait a minute here. Okay. You know, I think next.
For the rule of living. On the evening of the same Sabbath day at Bethany, while Jesus, the 12, and a group of believers were assembled about the fire in Lazarus' garden, Nathanael asked Jesus this question: "Master, although you have taught us the positive version of the old rule of life, instructing us that we should do to others as we wish them to do us, I do not fully discern how we can always abide by such an injunction. Let me illustrate my contention by citing the example of a lustful man who thus wickedly looks upon his intended consort in sin. How can we teach that this evil intended man should do to others as they should do to him?"
Okay, and he's going to answer that, right?
When Jesus heard Nathanael's question, he immediately stood upon his feet and, pointing his finger at the apostles, said, Nathanael, what manner of thinking is going on in your heart? Do you not receive my teachings as one who has been born of the Spirit? Do you not hear the truth as men of wisdom and spiritual understanding? When I admonish you to do to others as you would have them do to you, I spoke to men of high ideals, not to those who would be tempted to distort my teachings into a license for the encouragement of evil doing.
That's pretty plain, isn't it?
Direct.
Pretty direct. That's right.
When the master had spoken, Nathanael stood up and said, "Master, you should not think that I approve of such an interpretation of your teaching. I ask the question because I conjecture that many such men might thus misjudge your
Admonition.
admonition, and I hoped you would give us further instruction regarding these matters." And then when Nathanael had sat down, Jesus continued speaking, "I well know, Nathanael, that no such idea of evil is approved in your mind, but I am disappointed in that you all so often fail to put a genuine spiritual interpretation upon my commonplace teachings, instruction which must be given you in human language and as men must speak. Let me now teach you concerning the differing levels of meaning attached to the interpretation of this rule of living. This admonition to do to others that which you desire others to do to you."
So he's going to explain it in great detail here.
The level of the flesh. Such a purely selfish and lustful interpretation would be well exemplified by the supposition of your question.
That's one level of looking at it, right? The level of the flesh. Two. The level of feelings. This plane is one level higher than that of the flesh, and implies that sympathy and pity would enhance one's interpretation of this rule of living. So this is where sympathy comes in.
3. The level of mind. Now coming to action, the reason of mind and the intelligence of experience. Good judgment dictates that such a rule of living should be interpreted in consonance with the highest idealism embodied in the nobility of profound self-respect.
So what's he saying? We need to use our minds, right, to decide. It's ridiculous to think that using a lustful or a physical interpretation of this would do anybody any good, right? Just do unto others as yourself.
And I would note also that the feeling level is between the physical and the mind, meaning the mind is higher than the feeling. And the reason I say that is because often I hear people talking about, oh, is the feeling this and the feeling that as it being superior to the actual logical and rational thinking.
And it's many times just the opposite.
That's what this suggests.
Yeah. Okay. No.
4. The level of brotherly love. Still higher is discovered the level of unselfish devotion to the welfare of one's fellows. On this higher plane, the wholehearted social service growing out of the consciousness of the fatherhood of God and the consequent recognition of the brotherhood of man, there is discovered a new and far more beautiful interpretation of this basic rule of life.
And this is what Jesus came to teach us, right? The fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. And on this level, the love of one's brother replaces your every ordinary, everyday decisions about things, right? You have to look at it in a totally different way. These people, everyone is your brother, so they need to be treated as such.
5. The moral level. And then when you attain true philosophic levels of interpretation, when you have real insight into the rightness and wrongness of things, when you perceive the eternal fitness of human relationships, you will begin to view such a problem of interpretation as you would imagine a high-minded, idealistic, wise, and impartial third person would so view, and interpret such an injunction as applied to your personal problems of adjustment to your life situations.
So the moral level raises us one above. It takes the decisions from not only ourself, our intellectual self, our moral self, brings it up so that we need to set ourselves apart and look at things from a standpoint of a third person. How does this benefit someone else, right? Not for our own selfish reasons and that sort of thing. So the decisions we make should come more from the higher level, the moral level.
It's interesting
And
to know
then-
that he puts the moral above the love.
Yes, it does.
The brotherly love, though, it's the brotherly love.
Brotherly love. Now remember though that the moral decisions, your first moral decision is when your adjuster comes, right? And it's those moral decisions that help the adjuster helps do what? It adjusts our thought patterns to a higher moral level, right? That's what they call it, the adjuster. That father framing is the adjuster.
And this is why the next one is the spiritual level.
Yeah.
Okay, the spiritual level, and then last, but greatest of all, we attain the level of spirit. Insight and spiritual interpretation, which impels us to recognize in this rule of life the divine command to treat all men as we would conceive God would treat them. That is the universe ideal of human relationship. And this is your attitude toward all such problems when your supreme desire is ever to do the Father's will. I would therefore that you should do to all men that which you know I would do to them in like circumstance.
Okay, so what did we go from? We went from the physical to the mental, right? Then we went to the
Feeling first, and the feeling.
feelings, the moral, right?
And brotherly love.
The
First.
brotherly love, moral, and then now we're at the spiritual level. And the difference on the spiritual level is we should treat people as we conceive God would treat them, not as we would treat them, right? So the ideal is to treat them as you look at your brothers and sisters with fatherly love rather than just brotherly love, right? So we want to treat them as you think God the Father himself would treat them, and that's the higher level. Right?
So the level before the moral level seems to be taking into consideration cosmic perspective, but without bringing God directly into the equation.
That's
Whereas
right.
the spiritual level brings it as, now God, this is
Yeah.
your will, this is from your perspective, we're going to do as I think you would do it in the same
That's right.
circumstances.
Now, and also we have to think of too is what you're talking about there, Jill, is the cosmic responsibility, right? To be a cosmic responsible citizen in all 7 universes, we have to consider all aspects of brotherly love, right? So on that level, we're considering the cosmic level of love and responsibility. But the spiritual level takes it one further. God the Father looks at it from all 7 super universes and the 4 outer space levels, right? So you're jumping it up from our level or our spiritual level to his spiritual level by going with the spiritual level of God.
When he was talking to his disciples, and they had watched him, I would therefore that you should do to all men that which you know I would do to them in like circumstance. And they know what Jesus would do.
Yeah.
But to suggest that we would know what God would do is outrageous.
Well, no, that's why we, not necessarily, Millie, because of the thought adjuster.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if we try to keep in tune with the will of God in our lives and every decision we make, the thought adjuster's there to help us make those decisions. You know, to adjust our thoughts, to make us more moral, to find out what his will is rather than just our own. And that's the hardest part of being a human being is setting aside your own ego, always. You know, that's the toughest job we have. Because when we let the ego, our own, what we want, get in the way of what God wants, that's what short circuits the whole plan, right?
Mhm.
So,
But we still have things saying we attain the level of spiritual insight. And, you know, this is really where we are supposed to accomplish that right here.
that's right.
Okay?
In this life.
So, you know, now we gotta look at the barriers that keep us from doing that.
Mhm.
And, you know, I don't think we'll go into that right now. But, you know, in other words, this is an accomplishment that we're gonna make right here.
Yeah.
And it could happen within 2 decades, might be a couple generations, but it could happen sooner.
Well, this is what Jesus was talking about earlier about living in light and life personally.
Mhm.
When you try to attain the spiritual level, you're trying to attempt to do what? Step into the personal living in light and life, being enlightened, right? And that's what the lesson
Yeah.
is here.
And the thing is to find out what keeps you in darkness.
That's right.
And once you can escape that, then you're gonna move forward from there.
Yeah,
And sometimes it's just as simple as stepping out and supporting a child.
it is.
You know,
Yeah.
just something they're doing and supporting them in a godly way.
Everyday activity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, who's up next?
Is it me?
I think you are, Steve.
Yeah,
Okay. Or did I do the last one, the spiritual? I did the spiritual
Oh,
one, didn't I?
okay,
Yeah,
hold on.
it's up to you, Roger.
Nothing Jesus had to say to the apostles up to this time had ever more astonished them. They continued to discuss the Master's words long after he had retired. While Nathanael was slow to recover from his supposition that Jesus had misunderstood the spirit of his question, the others were more than thankful that their philosophic fellow apostle had had the courage to ask such a thought-provoking question. You know, it's interesting too, and what I like about this paragraph is Nathanael paid the price of being humiliated, right? But in paying that price of being humiliated, look at the benefit he made for all his brothers, right?
Mhm.
So then let's note that Jesus, when I read his quote, when he was responding to Nathanael, you know, I feel the emotional frustration in a way. I don't know if
Yeah.
frustration is probably not the best word, but you know, he seems that he was stirred.
Yeah.
And so as a first parenthesis is that even at the level of Jesus, you can have such kind of,
Yeah.
you know, those kind of things, emotion. But then the second thing is that Jesus, he probably knew that he would have like some kind of, you know, be like emotionally a little bit abrasive to Nathaniel.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting that he kind of soothed that over, didn't he, in talking about these things, you know. So Nathaniel took the sting of the embarrassment of this, but
He was kind of rebuked.
yeah, it's a rebuke. It really was.
It's
And
devil's advocate kind of thing.
yeah, it is.
But it also illustrates, like you were saying, that, you know, maybe Jesus lost it there for a second, but, you know, our duty is to always have mercy and forgiveness. So, you know, Nathaniel should have just recognized that this was a mishap and let it go instead of festering with it.
Yeah.
See that, you know, you got to keep everything in balance on that situation. You know, in other words, this world can even mess up Jesus, you know, for a second or two.
Well,
You know,
Nathaniel, you know, recovered from this, but it took him a little bit
so
afterwards.
it looks like he was still.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
What was I thinking?
Yeah, you know.
Well, it's very painful to be misunderstood, though.
Yeah, it is, you know, but, you know, we got to understand the world we live on.
Yeah.
So I wonder when we get to the mention word and you know, with all the long teaching that we're going to go through over there, if there will be opportunities, you know, with the teachers we're going to have, sometimes we're going to get rebuked when we.
I'm sure of that. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because our concepts individually on the different planets are going to be totally different from planet to planet, right? And we're not going to be all in the same spirit when we first get there. That's a learned response, you know, and that's what the Mansion Worlds does. It brings us up to a more morontial spiritual level, right? And so I'm sure that will be the case.
5, particularly when we are taught by those who are just above us.
Yeah.
This is probably more likely to happen than when we are taught by the Trinity teachers.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. 5, visiting Simon the Pharisee. Though Simon was not a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin, he was an influential Pharisee of Jerusalem. He was a half-hearted believer, and notwithstanding that he might be severely criticized therefore, he dared to invite Jesus and his personal associates, Peter, James, and John, to his home for a social meal. Simon had long observed the Master and was much impressed with his teachings, and even more so with his personality.
So this is another ego lesson, isn't it? Right? Simon was interested in Jesus, but he didn't want to totally let go to him, did he? Okay, so that's what we're talking about here a little bit. All right.
The wealthy Pharisees were devoted to almsgiving, and they did not shun publicity regarding their philanthropy. Sometimes they would even blow a trumpet as they were about to bestow charity upon some beggar. It was the custom of these Pharisees, when they provided a banquet for distinguished guests, to leave the doors, this is disgusting, to leave the doors of the house open so that even the street beggars might come in and, standing around the walls of the room behind the couches of the diners, might be in position to receive portions of food which might be tossed to them by the banqueters.
This is about as bad as you can get it. All right. And this is
Something with
a
the
painting of this very thing.
On this particular occasion at Simon's house, among those who came in off the street was a woman of unsavory reputation who had recently become a believer in the good news of the gospel of the kingdom. This woman was well known throughout all Jerusalem as the former keeper of one of the so-called high-class brothels, located hard by the temple court of the Gentiles. She had, on accepting the teachings of Jesus, closed up her nefarious place of business, and had induced the majority of women associated with her to accept the gospel and change their mode of living. Notwithstanding this, she was still held in great disdain by the Pharisees, and was compelled to wear her hair down, the badge of harlotry. This unnamed woman had brought with her a large flask of perfumed anointed lotion, and standing behind Jesus as he reclined at meat, began to anoint his feet, while she also wet his feet with her tears of gratitude, wiping them with the hair of her head. And when she had finished this anointing, she continued weeping and kissing his feet.
Okay, we got so many things in this paragraph, we could spend the rest of it, but I'm going to just hit the highlights. First, because she wore her hair down, she was disdained by the Pharisees, right? As a badge of harlotry. Just because of her mode of the way she looked, they disdained her. Right? She gave up the way she made her living. Now think about this. This woman made money running a brothel, right? Had lots of women working under her and stuff, but she gave up her mode of making a living to follow Jesus. Okay? Even though it was not a good mode of living, she still gave up everything she had to follow the Master. Right? We have to remember that. It doesn't matter where she came from. She still showed more faith and giving up more than the average person that comes along. Okay? And that's what I wanted to bring up on this. The other thing is bringing this perfume to anoint Jesus' feet. This is the highest valued thing she could think of to show the Master how much she appreciated him changing her life. Right? So that's where we're coming from, rather than her being a harlot and all that stuff.
It was a total act of love.
Total act of love. That's right.
Okay. When Simon saw all this, he said to himself, "This man, if he were a prophet, would have perceived who and what manner of woman this is who thus touches him, that she is a notorious sinner." And Jesus, knowing what was going on in Simon's mind, spoke up, saying, "Simon, I have something which I'd like to say to you." Simon answered, "Teacher, say on." Then said Jesus, "A certain wealthy moneylender who had 2 debtors. The one owed him 500 denarii, and the other 50. Now, when neither of them had wherewith to pay, he forgave them both. Which of them do you think, Simon, would love him most?" Simon answered, "He, I suppose, who he forgave the most." And Jesus said, "You have rightly judged." And pointing to the woman, he continued, "Simon, take a good look at this woman. I enter your house as an invited guest, yet you gave me no water for my feet. This grateful woman has washed my feet with tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You gave me no kiss of friendly greeting, but this woman, ever since she came in, has not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil you neglected to anoint, but she had anointed my feet with precious lotions. And what is the meaning of all this? Simply that her many sins have been forgiven, and this has led her to love much. But those who have received but little forgiveness sometimes love but little." And turning around towards the woman, he took her by the hand, and lifting her up, said, "You have indeed repented of your sins, and they are forgiven. Be not discouraged by the thoughtless and unkind attitude of your fellows. Go on in the joy and liberty of the kingdom of heaven."
It needs no explanation. It just says it just like it is. Those who've been forgiven much, receive much. this is an illustration or picture of the feast they're talking about, the Pharisees' house. When Simon and his friends, who sat at meat with him, heard these words, they were more astonished, and they began to whisper among themselves, "Who is this man that he dares to forgive sins?" And when Jesus heard them this murmuring, he turned to the dismissed woman, saying, "Woman, go in peace, your faith has saved you." You know, he is the Father, the creator of our local universe. Does he have the ability to forgive sin? Of course he does. Right? And then
We know that, but they do.
we know that, they don't know that. But out of all of this lesson, he just taught them what's the only thing that they picked up? That he told this woman that he forgave her sin. That's the number one concept they got from this whole meeting. They missed the whole point. Didn't
Well, they weren't there to hear the good word.
they? No.
They were there to bring charges if possible.
That's right. Okay. Jill.
As Jesus arose with his friends to leave, he turned to Simon and said, "I know your heart, Simon, how you are torn betwixt faith and doubts, how you are distraught by fear and troubled by pride. But I pray for you that you may yield to the light and may experience in your station in life just such mighty transformations of mind and spirit as may be comparable to the tremendous changes which the gospel of the kingdom has already wrought in the heart of your unbidden and unwelcome guest. And I declare to all of you that the Father has opened the doors of the heavenly kingdom to all who have the faith to enter. And no man or association of man can close those doors even to the most humble soul or supposedly the most flagrant sinner on earth, if such sincerely seek an entrance."
Sincerely seek.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And Jesus, and Jesus, with Peter, James, and John, took leave of their host and went to join the rest of the apostles at the camp in the garden of the Gethsemane.
So he told him that he knew what was really in his heart, didn't he? And that he just needed to let go and let his faith take him through the door. Interesting.
The same evening, Jesus made the long-to-be-remembered address to the apostles regarding the relative value of status with God and progress in the eternal ascent to paradise. Said Jesus, "My children, if there exists a true and living connection between the child and the Father, the child is certain to progress continuously toward the Father's ideals. True, the child may at first make slow progress, but the progress is none the less sure. The important thing is not the rapidity of your progress, but rather its certainty. Your actual achievement is not so important as the fact that the direction of your progress is Godward. What you are becoming day by day is of infinitely more importance than what you are today."
Did Jesus not spell out the ascension plan right there? You know, it's not so much how fast we get there, it's the fact that every day we make a little progress closer and closer and closer. So he's preparing us for that ascension plan in this paragraph. Not only to make a more connection between God the Father as Father and child, but for us to actually one day stand before God the Father. What were
This transformed woman whom some of you saw at Simon's house today is at this moment living on a level which is vastly below that of Simon and his well-meaning associates. But while these Pharisees are occupied with the false progress of the illusion of traversing deceptive circles of meaningless ceremonial services, this woman has, in dead earnest, started out on the long and eventful search for God, and her path toward heaven is not blocked by spiritual pride and moral self-satisfaction. The woman is, humanly speaking, much farther away from God than Simon. Is much farther away from God than Simon, but her soul is in progressive motion. She is on the way towards an eternal goal. There are present in the woman tremendous spiritual possibilities for the future. Some of you may not stand high in the actual levels of soul and spirit, but you are making daily progress on the living way opened up through faith to God. There are tremendous possibilities in each of you for the future. Better by far to have a small but living and growing faith than to be possessed of a great intellect with its dead stories of worldly wisdom and spiritual unbelief.
So it's better to have that little faith than to be an intelligent,
I
someone
did
like,
not understand there at present in this woman's tremendous spiritual possibilities for the future. She is much farther away from God than Simon.
she is learning, that's what he's talking about, in book learning and spiritual learning and things like that, because he's a Pharisee and he spent his whole life studying the Torah and all that, is higher, on a higher level of book learning. But her faith is brings her up on a higher level.
Her soul is
Her
in
soul.
progressive motion.
That's right. That's right.
Whereas Simon is not.
Simon's living in this dead zone. He's got lots of book learning, but he's not progressing. You know, that's why we're all eternally students, really, if you think about it. We are That's why they keep telling us this life is the vestibule to our real life. When we really start learning is what? When we get to the mansion ways, right? So how could we be arrogant about what we know in this life? It's so small, you know. It really is when you think about it. So we have nothing to be big-headed about, do we? When it comes right down to it.
It might be that his morals and his ethics are superior to hers too, you know.
Yeah.
But yet he still looks down his nose at his brother, so, you know, he kind of washes out what
Yeah.
he gained, you know.
That's right.
And her starting from the bottom is going to see things from a different light as far as the way people really are and what they're capable of.
Yeah.
And in fact, as a civilization, we are in a little bit, greatly in that way. And I think the Urantia book somewhere else states it, is that we have evolved much faster intellectually than we have spiritually.
Yeah.
Which means we are industrial and all that, but we don't have the reason. We don't have the,
And that's a problem too, isn't
that's
it?
a big problem.
It's just
It's a
big
big
deal.
problem.
When you get the technology and you can destroy each other quicker and not have the spiritual forethought not to do that. You know, that's a big problem. You know. You want to take the next one?
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Okay. But Jesus earnestly warned his apostles against the foolishness of the child of God who presumes upon the Father's love. He declared that the Heavenly Father is not a lax, loose, or foolishly indulgent parent who is ever ready to condone sin and forgive recklessness. He cautions his hearers not to mistakenly to apply his illustration of father and son so as to make it appear that God is like some overindulgent and unwise parent who conspire with the foolish of earth to encompass the moral undoing of their thoughtless children, and who are thereby certainly and directly contributing to the delinquency and early demoralization of their own offspring. Said Jesus, "My Father does not indulgently condone those acts and practices of his children which are self-destructive and suicidal to all moral growth and spiritual progress. Such sinful practices are an abomination in the sight of God."
So being a spiritual being, we have a responsibility to live like a spiritual being, right? Not do anything we want to and think God's going to forgive us for it, right? to that is a abomination in the sight of God. You know, you may as well say I'm spitting in the face of God, you know, because I will not do His will.
And that has to do with the discipline of children too. I mean,
Yeah.
our children in our daily life, neighbors' children, or our own children or grandchildren.
Yeah.
So we have to take responsibility.
It's our spiritual
It
responsibility.
is our spiritual responsibility.
Yeah. Many other semi-private meetings and banquets did Jesus attend with the high and low, the rich and poor of Jerusalem, before he and his apostles finally departed for Capernaum. And many indeed became believers in the gospel of the kingdom and were subsequently baptized by Abner and his associates, who remained behind to foster the entrance of the kingdom in Jerusalem and thereabouts.
6. Returning to Capernaum. The last week of April, Jesus and the 12 departed from their Bethany headquarters near Jerusalem and began their journey back to Capernaum by way of Jericho and the Jordan.
Billy, would you take the next one?
The chief priests and the religious leaders of the Jews held many secret meetings for the purpose of deciding what to do with Jesus. They were all agreed that something should be done to put a stop to his teachings, but they could not agree on a method. They had hoped that the civil authorities would dispose of him as Herod had put an end to John, but they discovered that Jesus was so conducting his work that the Roman officials were not much alarmed by his preaching. Accordingly, at a meeting which was held the day before Jesus' departure for Capernaum, it was decided that he would have to be apprehended on a religious charge and be tried by the Sanhedrin. Therefore, a commission of 6 secret spies was appointed to follow Jesus to observe his words and acts, and when they had amassed sufficient evidence of lawbreaking and blasphemy, to return to Jerusalem with their report. These 6 Jews caught up with the apostolic party, numbering about 30, at Jericho, and under the pretense of desiring to become disciples, attached themselves to Jesus' family of followers, remaining with the group up to the time of the beginning of the second preaching tour in Galilee, whereupon 3 of them returned to Jerusalem to submit their report to the chief priests and the Sanhedrin.
What happened to the other 3? They become believers, right? All right. It's interesting that the Sanhedrin here had meetings on how to stop Jesus, not to discover what he was teaching, you know, not to take in the possibility that he really was the Messiah, you know, that sort of thing. So it's kind of interesting how they approach this.
Well, then, you know, back then, it's just a good example of peer pressure all along. You know, I mean, that's really the fear of a lot of the Pharisees and everything else is just how much peer pressure is coming from the higher up to where it just makes everybody, you know, they're not able to look. And that still goes on in our society right now. It's heavily influenced in a certain way.
Peter preached to the assembled multitude at the crossing of the Jordan, and the following morning they moved up the river towards Anaphas. They wanted to proceed straight on to Capernaum, but such a crowd gathered here they remained 3 days, preaching, teaching, and baptizing. They did not move towards home until early Sabbath morning, the first day of May. The Jerusalem spies were sure they would now secure their first charge against Jesus, that of Sabbath breaking, since he had presumed to start his journey on the Sabbath day. But they were doomed to disappointment because just before their departure, Jesus called Andrew into his presence and before them all instructed him to proceed for a distance of only 1,000 yards, the legal Jewish Sabbath day's journey.
So they were bound to be disappointed, weren't they? Okay.
But spies did not have long to wait for their opportunity to accuse Jesus and his associates of Sabbath breaking. As the company passed along the narrow road, the waiting wheat, which was just then ripening, was near at hand on either side, and some of the apostles, being hungry, plucked the ripe grain and ate it. It was customary for travelers to help themselves to grain as they passed along the road, and therefore No thought of wrongdoing was attached to such conduct. But the spies seized upon this as a pretext for assailing Jesus when they saw Andrew rub the grain in his hand. They went up to him and said, "Do you not know that it is unlawful to pluck and rub the grain on the Sabbath day?" And Andrew answered, "But we are hungry, and rub only sufficient for our needs. And since when did it become sinful to eat grain on the Sabbath day?" But the Pharisees answered, "You do no wrong in eating, but you do break the law in plucking and rubbing out of the grain between your hands. Surely your master would not approve of such acts." Then said Andrew, "But it is not wrong to eat the grain. Surely the rubbing out between our hands is hardly more work than the chewing of the grain, while which you allow. Wherefore do you quibble over such trifles?" When Andrew intimate that they were quibblers, they were indignant, and rushing back to where Jesus walked along, talking to Matthew, they protested, saying, "Behold, teacher, your apostles do that which is unlawful on the Sabbath day. They pluck, rub, and eat the grain. We are sure you will command them to cease." And then said Jesus to the accusers, "You are indeed zealous for the law, and you do well to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But did you never read in the Scriptures that one day, when David was hungry, he and they who were with him entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which it was not lawful for anyone to eat save the priest? And David also gave this bread to those who were with him. And have you not read in our law that it is lawful to do many needful things on the Sabbath day? And shall I not, before the day is finished, see you eat that which you have brought along for the needs of this day? My good men, you do well to be zealous for the Sabbath, but you would do better to guard the health and well-being of your fellows. I declare that the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. And if you are here present with us to watch my words, then will I openly proclaim that the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath."
Put them all in their place, didn't he? He created the Sabbath.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Did you know at this time that those guys were from the Sanhedrin?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He knew he had the spies along with him. The Pharisees were astonished and confounded by his words of discernment and wisdom. For the remainder of the day they kept by themselves and dared not to ask any more questions. I think they got the message.
Jesus' antagonism to the Jewish tradition and slavish ceremonials was always positive. It consisted in what he did and what he affirmed. The Master spent little time in negative denunciations. He taught that those who know God can enjoy the liberty of living without deceiving themselves by the licenses of sin. Said Jesus to the apostle, "Man, if you are enlightened by truth and really know what you are doing, you are blessed. But if you know not the divine way, you are unfortunate and already breakers of the law."
Okay.
Back in the time. It was around noon on Monday, May the 3rd, when Jesus and the 12 came to the Bethesda by boat from Taricha. They traveled by boat in order to escape those who journeyed with them. But by the next day, the others, including the few spies from Jerusalem, had again found Jesus.
Persistent.
On Tuesday evening, Jesus was conducting one of his customary classes of questions and answers when the leader of the 6 spies said to him, "I was today talking with one of John's disciples who is here attending upon your teaching, and we were at a loss to understand why you never commanded your disciples to to fast and pray as we Pharisees fast and as John bade his followers. And Jesus, referring to a statement by John, answered this question. Do the sons of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as the bridegroom remains with them, they can hardly fast. But the time is coming when the bridegroom shall be taken away. And during those times the children of the bride chamber undoubtedly will fast and pray. To pray is natural for the children of light, but fasting is not a part of the gospel of the kingdom of heaven. But be reminded that a wise tailor does not sew a piece of new and unshrunk cloth upon an old garment, lest when it is wet it shrink and produce a worse rent. Neither do men put new wine into old wineskins, lest the new wine burst the skins, so that both the wine and the skins perish. The wise man puts the new wine into fresh wineskins. Therefore do my disciples show wisdom, and that they do not bring too much of the old order over into the new teaching of the gospel of the kingdom. You who have lost your teacher may be justified in fasting for a time. Fasting may be an appropriate part of the law of Moses. But in the coming kingdom, the sons of God shall experience freedom from fear and joy in the divine Spirit. And when they heard these words, the disciples of John were comforted, while the Pharisees themselves were more confounded.
Okay, so what's he talking about here? He's talking about basically that the laws of the kingdom of heaven are not the same laws of the original Jewish doctrines. Did you catch that?
Mm-hmm.
All right, in the Jewish doctrines, they fasted and prayed, things like that. He basically says right here that fasting is not part of the kingdom of heaven. You see that? So, and that's why he goes on to talk about adding unshrunk cloth, putting old wine in the new skins, that sort of thing too. He's not trying to make the apostles take their beliefs, their old beliefs from what they learn as Jews, and try to plug it into the new gospel of the kingdom, right? So it's a new gospel which frees men from these traditions. You know, the Jewish people had over 600 and something laws that they had to go by. And basically Jesus came in and said, you don't need any of these. What's your law? To love God the Father and love everyone else as yourself, right? That's really the only law. You don't need the rest of them if you do those two things, right? So that's what he's talking about here.
And this is true with the Urantia book, the Fifth Epochal Revelation of the Urantia book.
It is. It's a perfect example, isn't it? You know, because we can't take the Urantia book enlightens us. It opens up our mind to all these new possibilities. And if you take these new possibilities and you try to plug it into the original Christian doctrine, it don't fit. I tell you, it don't fit. You know, because that's where I came from. You know, and I can tell you there are conflicts there. There's some huge conflicts there. So what you need to do if you decide you want to be enlightened and read the Urantia book, then you need to open your mind and open it for the possibilities of new teachings, because that's what you're going to see. You really are. And they reference back and forth to the Old and New Testament, but some of it just does not agree 100% with the Old and New Testament. That's just the way it is. And for a while, I spent a portion of my life trying to disprove the book because of the differences. Okay, but I come to find out that the book was truth to me, or a higher truth than what I've known before. So that's what the kind of decision.
I put it as, you know, man wasn't ready for this truth at that time.
Yeah.
So, you know, we had to come up with a Bible so he could continue in his corrupt ways and think he was doing godly works. It's really, you know, and yet it still has God in there for those that want to find him.
Yeah.
But, you know, it allows the corruption, where this takes more of the corruption out of the equation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's mine. Then the master proceeded to warn his hearers against entertaining the notion that all olden teaching should be replaced entirely by new doctrines. Said Jesus, "That which is old and also true must abide. Likewise, that which is new but false must be rejected. But that which is new and also true, have the faith and courage to accept. Remember, it is written, forsake not an old friend, for the new is not comparable to him. As new wine, so is a new friend. If it becomes old, you shall drink it with gladness."
He's talking about the revelation there, is he not?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just as plain as day. You know, you keep that which is good and you discard that which is not. You know? All right. The Feast of Spiritual Goodness. That night, long after the usual listeners had retired, Jesus continued to teach his apostles. He began with special instruction by quoting from the prophet Isaiah. Oh, sorry.
Why have you fasted? For what reason do you afflict your souls while you continue to find pleasure in oppression and to take delight in injustice? Behold, you fast for the sake of strife and contention, and to smite with the first of wickedness. But you shall not fast in this way to make your voice heard.
Yeah, you can't sit around and go, "Oh, woe is me," can you? It's not justified.
It is such a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul. Is it to bow down like his head, like a bulrush, to grovel in sackcloth and ashes? Will you dare to call this a fast and an acceptable day in the sight of the Lord? Is not this the fast I should choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the knots of heavy burdens, to let the oppressors go free, and to break every yoke? It may not share my bread. Is it not to share my bread with the hungry, and to bring those who are homeless and poor to my house? And when I see those who are naked, will I clothe them?
Then shall your light break forth as the morning light, your health springs forth speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you, while the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then will you call upon the Lord, and he shall answer. You will cry out, and shall say, Here am I. And all this he will do if you refrain from oppression, condemnation, and vanity. The Father rather desires that you draw out your heart to the hungry, and that you minister to the afflicted souls. Then shall your light shine in obscurity, and even your darkness shall be as the noonday. Then shall the Lord guide you continuously, satisfying your soul and renewing your strength. You shall become like a watered garden, like a spring whose waters fail not. And they who do these things shall restore the wasted glories. They shall raise up the foundations of many generations. They shall be called the rebuilders of broken walls, the restorers of safe paths in which to dwell.
So he's telling us not to fast, but to get out and do things, right? Take action. Feed the sick. Heal the sick, feed the hungry. Take people in if they need to be taken in. Become a brother to the brothers of your life, right?
Yeah, and I like to put in there that should be a whole country doing that within itself.
The whole world, really.
Well, yeah, and then it'll eventually, but so much, right now they try to put that responsibility on the church or somewhere here and there where they're constantly degrading the poor and, there's a whole lot of conflict going on within our country on that particular subject. Okay.
And it shouldn't be just the church or just one group or this group or that group. It's everybody.
Everything should be established to take care of everybody.
It's everybody's responsibility.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, and then long into the night, Jesus propounded to his apostles the truth that it was their faith that made them secure in the kingdom of the present and the future, and not their affliction of soul, nor fasting of body. He exhorted the apostle at least to live up to the ideas of the prophet of old, and express the hope that they would progress far beyond even the ideals of Isaiah. And the older prophets, his last words that night were, "Grow in grace by means of that living faith which grasps the fact that you are the sons of God, while at the same time it recognizes every man as a brother."
That sums up the whole thing, doesn't it? You know, growing grace means the living faith, grasp the fact that you are sons of God, but at the same time recognize every man as a brother. And it's the same mission over and over and over. The fatherhood of God and brotherhood of man, right? And that is it.
No, we had one.
Oh, one more, okay. It was about too fast, okay. It was after 2 o'clock in the morning when Jesus ceased speaking, and every man went to his place to sleep. So they were at work. Okay, that's it. All right. Stephen, would you like to close us?
Father, thank you for this meeting and opening our eyes to your words of wisdom as we shall ponder these as we go on in our life. Teach us as you taught your Son Jesus, so that we may abide in the ways he did. And thank you for this group and all their efforts in discernment and trying to enlighten us as we journey on. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Maybe get the video?
Yeah, cut that off and then
We'll
if
discuss.
anybody wants, I'll bend their ears for a minute.
Oh. Thank you for joining us at home. Please come
Yeah.
see us again.
Okay.